Good evening to you all. For my 20% project, I researched, then designed, 3D printed, and built a robotic hand that can perform American Sign Language. The purpose of this project was to build a device that could both teach sign language, translate it, and to generally build a versatile hand. Now, teaching sign language, it's fairly important because roughly 1% of the population is deaf, and up to 10% of the population is hard of hearing, which means that there's a large population out there that cannot interact with us in the normal way, so it would be beneficial for more people to know how to sign. Translating is also very important. In both of these scenarios, there was an informational briefing after a hurricane. They were trying to convey vital information to the public. And in both of these instances, the sign language translator on site mistranslated information, meaning that the population got the wrong information, which could be disastrous. So I thought, why not build a device that could fix that problem in that sort of scenario? So in this project, I had to research the anatomy of the human hand in order to build a realistic version of the human hand. I designed and developed each one of the parts of the human hand, and I 3D printed them with a 3D printer and actuated all of the joints using servos and an Arduino. So some common terms that will be necessary to know are extension and flexion. Extension is a straightened joint. Flexion is a bent joint. Abduction and adduction are the left-right movements of the wrist, and extension and flexion of the wrist is the up and down movement of the wrist. The bone structure of the hand can be divided into 3 sections. The first section is the fingers, or the phalanges. Each finger is composed of 3 bones. The thumb is composed of 2 bones. The next section, which makes up the palm area, is the metacarpus. It's composed of 5 bones. For the most part, none of these bones move. The thumb metacarpal bone, however, does move, and it provides much of the rotational and extension movement of the thumb. The final section is the carpus. This is the wrist section. This allows for adduction and abduction, and flexion and extension of the wrist. In the carpus, there's 2 layers of bone. One layer of bone, the first layer, provides the movement of adduction and abduction, the left-right movement of the hand. The second layer provides extension and flexion of the wrist. And I would have to emulate both of these structures in my robotic hand for it to properly function. The muscles of the hand, for the most part, are located in the forearm. However, the interosseous muscles in the first and second layer are located in the palm. These allow for precise movements. These were the muscles that I was going to have to reproduce when I built my my robotic hand. The extensor tendons are located up and down the fingers. These are very important because, for the most part, muscles are big and they cannot fit into a small thing such as your finger. So I needed to reproduce the tendons with thinner structures that could translate movement from the palm into the fingers. The forearm muscles are composed of 3 layers: the superficial layer, intermediate layer, and deep layer. The superficial layer, for the most part, performs the abduction, adduction, flexion, and extension of the wrist, and this is kind of the bigger muscles. The intermediate layer is composed of 1 main muscle. This muscle performs all of the hefty work for the fingers, and all of your fingers are attached via tendons to this 1 muscle, which is why if you bend 1 finger, you actually bend other fingers as well. The final layer is the deep layer. This layer allows for most of the thumb movement, such as rotational and extension and flexion of the thumb. Ligaments, tendons, and cartilage are very important structures in the human hand, as they provide structure while providing for flexibility of the hand. These were going to be very important when I designed my robotic hand. Some of the ligaments seen here keep the carpus together and also hold some of the phalangeal joints together. These are very important because they allow for flexibility while providing the structure that a hand needs in order to perform the functions necessary. Once I had completed my research and knew what I had to build, I started to design and develop my robotic hand. My general design would be something along these lines. I would have ball and socket joints, which emulates the bone structure of the hand, and using one long string acting as the tendon that would go to the tip of each individual finger bone, and when it gets pulled by a servo motor, it would bend the tip of the finger, or whatever joint it was, down. This is similar to the human hand, which uses a tendon to bend each individual joint. In my first 3 revisions of the finger, I started out with a design that could dislocate horizontally and vertically almost effortlessly. Then I began to add structures that would provide structure while keeping and maintaining function of the finger. I first added ligaments, or dental rubber bands that ran along the side of the finger to prevent horizontal dislocation. And I also added a positive stop to each individual finger joint to allow for, to prevent vertical dislocation. Both of these structures are seen in the human hand. In my next 3 revisions, I began to make the fingers more functional. I added structures and individualized each joint to allow for the functions required in the fingers. And in my last revisions, I began to make the finger look more humanoid to provide a more authentic feel to the robotic hand, which is the whole goal of the project, making an authentic feeling robotic hand. Some analogous structures that I had to use along the way were ligaments, cartilage, and tendons. For my ligament structures, I use dental rubber bands, and these run along the sides of the fingers, similar to what ligaments do, which is wrap around the individual joints to prevent them from dislocating. The cartilage structure that I decided to use was Teflon tape. Now, about halfway through the project, midway through the project, I switched out this material because the Teflon tape was so thin that it would actually rip up, and it would rip up in the joints, which would be devastating to the joints because they couldn't bend properly. So I switched out this cartilage structure for graphite. The final analogous structure that I had was tendons. I used 30-pound line as the tendon that ran up and down each finger, which would allow for the translation of movement from the palm into the tips and the different parts of the finger. I had a design for the hand. All I needed to do now was build it. The modes of movement that I was going to use for the hand was servo motors. Servo motors are motors geared up at a high ratio, so they have a large torque. Meanwhile, they're precise. These servos that I used were 180-degree servos. They could position themselves between 0 and 180 degrees. For this project, I used 2 different types of servos. A 9-gram servo, which is smaller servos, which I used to actuate each individual joint, and 2 50-gram servos, which I used to actuate the abduction and adduction of the wrist and the extension and flexion of the wrist. I'll quickly go over my electrical design. To control my robotic hand, I used an Arduino, which is essentially a small computer that I can program to perform various functions. I attached 2 servo boards to the Arduino to allow for the translation of 2 pins to 40 pins in my case. Now, normally a servo would take 1 pin per servo. When I attached the servo boards, I could do 20 pins or 20 servos per 2 pins, and this was an advantage because I didn't have to use a larger computer to perform the necessary functions. For my wrist design, I decided to go with a larger and more structural structure rather than something similar to the human wrist because I was kind of running out of time. But I did design a prototype for the wrist that properly mimics the human wrist. I used 2 layers, a first layer and second layer. The first layer performs the exact same function, abduction and adduction of the wrist, and the second layer, with help from the metacarpal bones, would provide the extension and flexion motions necessary for an authentic feel of the human hand. Here, you can see that the design that I had would properly mimic what the carpal bones actually perform. The first layer, as seen here, would provide the adduction and abduction of the wrist, and the second layer would provide the extension and flexion of the wrist. So, once I had completed the building the robotic hand, I programmed all 26 letters of the American Sign Language alphabet into the hand, and I can actuate them for you now. So, I have my name coded up. As you can see, I can perform any of the letters of the American Sign Language alphabet, and this could be used to both teach sign language and translate it. Some of the major obstacles I came upon along the way were the structural integrity of the hand. I decided to go with such a big and bulky design because it was so structurally sound, using springs rather than a servo to balance out the hand because it weighed so much. In fact, during one of the presentations I had for this, the servo that actuated the abduction and adduction actually burned out and caught on fire because it was working too hard, which is why I have such a strong design. Another problem was programming the hand. Now, normally this isn't that big a deal because computers these days have hundreds of gigabytes of storage. The storage on my Arduino, however, was only 16 kilobytes, which is not enough for even a low-quality picture, which meant that I had to not only learn how to program an Arduino, but also learn how to properly code and condense my code into something that can fit on such a small device. The final struggle that I had was programming in some of the letters because it was hard to visualize exactly how they were supposed to look. But one of the things that this device can provide is a stepping stone onto a device that could perform American Sign Language words and phrases, which then can be used in such a situation as seen earlier in a critical situation. Thank you. Any questions? Geo. Probably took me upwards of 150 hours to build this. Gorv. Okay, so the reason why I use servos instead of solenoids, and for those of you that don't know, solenoids are a device that can be in two states, either an extended state or a contracted state, and it cannot be in between. So it can either be like extended 1 inch or contracted 1 inch. So the reason why I didn't use that was even though it could provide speed and power, the precision required for American Sign Language for each individual joint was much greater than that could be provided by a solenoid. Geo. Not really. For the most part, I had to learn how to use a lot of different tools, and that was one of the biggest struggles. And I did get some help when learning how to use various tools required for the project. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you. Yes. What would I have done differently? With regards to research, or which part of the project? The design. So, one thing that I would have done differently would be, rather than using rubber bands to extend the finger, I would have used a push-me, pull-you sort of design, which would prevent the excess torque required by the servos to actuate each individual joint. If I used a push-me, pull-you system, I could phase out the rubber bands, which would make the life of these servos easier when they had to pull each individual joint. Awesome. Oh, yes.
What made you choose those specific servos? Was it a cost thing? Was it a strength thing?
When you mean specific servos, do you mean 9-gram servos or like the company that made them?
The ones you used to actually.
So I chose 9-gram servos because they're compact, and I figured that was the largest amount of torque that would be required to actuate each individual joint. So I thought they were a perfect fit for the project that I was embarking on. Awesome. Oh, yeah, I think so. good? Yeah. Bad. Good, bad. What do you think? Dad. No, I have to grade Devin. Oh, wait.
So how does I put
Just
this
put
in
that in
my
your
pocket?
pocket.
And ah, is this in the right place? Oh. Hi everyone, my name is Devin Lomax, and I decided to base my 20% project upon the biomechanics of basketball shoes. Now, I'm an athlete, and I've been an athlete for quite a while. I've also considered basketball my favorite sport for quite a while as well. I've purchased basketball shoes just like any other player, but I've always questioned the high-priced basketball shoes that basketball shoes come in that are best for your performance. Now, this has also led me to the question of how exactly do basketball shoes improve your performance on the court? While conducting my research, I discovered a few flaws in current basketball shoes. So for my 20% project product, I decided to design a basketball shoe that would theoretically perform optimal biomechanical functions. So to start off, what is biomechanics? Well, biomechanics is the study or the science of the body in motion. And to have necessary information for my design, I first had to consider the biomechanics of the human foot as well. Proper foot biomechanics allow us to walk, run, jump, and move freely without pain or dysfunction. During walking and running, the musculoskeletal system generates forces to propel us forward. To propel us forward efficiently, the foot must alternate between being a strong, rigid structure and a softer, more flexible one. Specifically, the foot must alternate between being a mobile adapter to adjust to the varying terrain and as a rigid lever for forward propulsion and locomotion. Now, the timing of these two states is called the gait cycle. The gait cycle is a natural movement of the feet. It starts when the heel of the left foot comes in contact with the ground, as you can see right here, otherwise known as the heel strike, and ends with the heel strike of the same foot, like you can see here. This was a necessary piece of information I used in the creation of my design. Now, the kinetic chain. The kinetic chain is a concept used to describe human movement. The concept was introduced by Franz Relu in 1875, a mechanical engineer. He proposed that rigid overlapping segments were connected via joints. And this created a system where movement at one joint produced or affected movement at another joint in the kinetic link. Now, the ankle of the foot is a terminal joint in the kinetic chain. In any sport, the equipment that is used is essential to a player's performance, especially in basketball, where a basketball shoe is quite essential to how a basketball player performs. Now, because of the different movements and positions in basketball, basketball shoes have to do a variety of things, like provide durability, stability, traction, and shock absorption, and also have to be able to prevent injuries. Now, as I said before, I came upon a few flaws of existing basketball shoes. So before I get into that, I'm going to show you some pictures of basketball shoes right now. Okay. So the first flaw that I came upon was the narrow toe box of basketball shoes, as you can see right here. If you were to take an X-ray of an NBA player toes inside of their shoe, you would likely see that their toe bones have been squeezed narrower than the ball of the foot. Leading sports podiatrist Dr. Ray McClanahan stated that your toes are not designed to get narrower from the ball of the foot, rather get wider from the ball of the foot. Now what this ultimately does is it decreases stability, arch strength, and the ability to prevent an ankle sprain. Now this is LeBron's signature shoe. This is LeBron James. He's played, I think, about 15 seasons in the NBA. And this is actually what the shoe did to his feet. As you can see, the toes have been compressed on one another. This is also Shaquille O'Neal's feet. Just some examples of what this does to NBA players' feet. So as I was saying before, it takes away the ability to mitigate an ankle sprain. So if the fifth toe is in alignment with this metatarsal, then the toe bone and the tendon at the tendon at the bottom can ultimately evert the foot, thus stopping the ankle sprain. Another flaw I came upon was the elevated heel. Once you put an elevated heel on anything, the lower leg bones ultimately rotate to the more unstable part of the ankle. And so what this does, it forces the ankle into an unstable position and actually ultimately changes the position of the pelvis, which two things that could cause injury. Another flaw I came upon was the toe spring. As you can see right here, the toe spring is like elevated, and there's no physiological benefit to this at all. What this ultimately does is put the toes in a chronically elevated position, which takes away flexion and extension, and also may cause injuries. Now here's an example of flexion and extension. Extension is moving a limb from bent to straight, and flexion is the opposite of extension. Two very important things when considering biomechanics of the human feet. High tops. So high tops were created to lend support to the ankle. They were created to actually prevent injuries, and high tops actually do the opposite. If a joint intended for mobility becomes less mobile, then the joint directly above it has to pick up the slack with more mobility and subsequently less stability. Simply put, if you lack ankle mobility, then you have a higher chance of knee pain. And this actually has to do with the whole kinetic chain thing I was talking about earlier. If one joint is not moving the way it should, then other joints in that kinetic link are affected as well. Oh, and also studies have actually shown that the increased weight on high tops actually decreases the speed and quickness of NBA players. This right here is my design to get rid of those few flaws that I mentioned before. So as you can see, this design right here where it curves down, it ultimately gets rid of the toe spring and the narrow toe box. The heel is also less elevated, and it's a low top shoe. As you can see right here, this is what that narrow toe box ultimately does, and the wider toe box. Here's another view of that kind of rough draft of my design. As you can see here, it does the same thing. This is looking at it from below view of this design. So in conclusion, some shoes that were created to be beneficial for the feet actually could end up harming the feet and having negative long-term effects. Whether it's for sports or everyday activities, consider these few flaws that could ultimately harm the feet and have long-term effects when you're picking out shoes. Now, connections to biology and what we're doing in our class will some of you that took biology know that it's the study of organisms, and it's actually divided into various groups, and one of them is anatomy, which I conducted research on, the anatomy of human foot. So to reflect upon that, my whole project, one of my challenges was actually finding information on the biomechanics of the human feet and how it correlates to shoes, because well, a lot of basketball shoes tend to look upon more of the advertising, like the LeBron sign or the Michael Jordan sign, rather than what the basketball shoe actually does. So there were only a few studies done on basketball shoes. And another challenging part was actually designing the shoe. That's it. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
So those flaws that you mentioned, are they present in almost all brands of basketball?
Yes. Yes. Probably most basketball shoes.
And also, did you draw them?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Yes.
Do you have a logo? Did you design a logo yet?
No, I've not designed a logo yet. Yes.
So when you go to buy a basketball sneaker, will you get a low top or a high top?
I probably get a low top because I'm smaller when you're talking about like people who play basketball. So I probably play position of a guard, and they bring the ball up and down the court, and they use the most speed. So, yeah. Okay. Oh.
Good job.
Here you go.
That was good. Should I wait for him or should I just go?
Just go.
And K18 is not showing? Oh, here's. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna go. Oh my god. Should I just... So my project was on the effect of oil spills on animals, on like how they affect them, diseases that can occur, toxicity, and what exactly happens to the ecosystem. And the reason I did this project was because I'd seen pictures online of of animals and fish getting stuck in oil spills, it covering them, animals dying. I want to know what exactly happens and how it gets cleaned up and how people work to try to avoid this to happen. So, a little bit of information on oil. Oil is one of the most valued resources today, and although the introduction of renewable energy has decreased the production of oil and consumption of oil, it still is quite a large market. As you can see, petroleum and other liquids is still a large market in energy, and the renewables is growing, but it's still quite at a slow rate. And consumption of major countries is quite large for oil and petroleum, and this is as of 2010. So of course consumption has probably gone down, but it's still quite large. So when doing my research, I needed to know how toxic oil was and what kind of effects it has on the environment. So there are about five different types of oil. There's very light oils, medium oils, heavy oils, and very heavy oils. So it's a kind of a range, but each of them has different effects on the environment.
So very light oils are extremely toxic, but evaporate very quickly. Light oils don't evaporate very quickly, and heavy oils that you see in pictures, like the black sticky things that you see sticking to animals and sticking to fish, that's what heavy oils are. And those can be very hard to clean up because it's sticky and it's hard to get it away from the water and away from the liquid, the body of water that's in. And then very heavy oils diffuse into the water. So these are the hardest to clean up because you can't see it, because since it diffuses, it's very hard to find it, very hard to clean it up. So the government, recognizing this problem, has set several measures in place to try to prevent this from happening. So the EPA has introduced the SPCC and the FRP, the Facility Response and the Spill Prevention Control and Response Plan. And so basically, and to summarize it, the spill prevention and control is just to prevent oil spills reaching shores, reaching habitable lands, reaching fishing areas. And the facility response is just a plan that has to be submitted by various oil transportation companies to how they're going to clean up the oil in case it spills. And one thing that I did notice, though, while researching the laws and researching the consequences, that there really was no finite consequence for for not submitting a plan or not properly taking care of your oil transportation. It was more just, if you don't complete this deadline, then it moves to this deadline. If you don't complete this deadline, it moves to the next deadline. There really was no punishment to the company. So when an oil spill occurs, there are multiple processes that happen. There's the oil spill occurs, the survey and the cleanup. And since the government has done some work, done laws and things like that to try to prevent the oil spills from happening, many third parties have to be involved because not enough government preparation is there. There's not enough government preparation, not enough government groups working on this. So there's an oil spill occurs, survey and cleanup. And so this in the survey of the oil spill, there's the damage to resources and the animals and cost of recovery. The damage to resources would include harm to fishing areas, harm to beaches, harm to local wildlife, and how much they would have to charge the company to actually repair this and try to get away from this spill, and the cost of recovery. And this can often take many, many years because scientific studies have to be involved. There has to be the scientific studies have to be involved, and tests have to be done to find the toxicity of oil and how much damage it actually causes. So there are multiple types of restoration when cleaning up this oil. There's primary restoration, compensatory restoration, emergency restoration, early restoration. So primary restoration, compensatory restoration are just after the survey is completed. Then they have to finish the they have to move the cleanup to after the survey finished, and they have to just put it before the actual spill happens. And emergency and early restoration is if it's a very light oil or a light oil or a very heavy oil, and the damage is really, really bad. And by the time they complete the survey, the damage will already be done. They just complete the restoration before the survey finishes. So of course, my project was on researching how exactly fish get affected by these oil spills and how they can get damaged, how they can get hurt. So then the fish digestive process is very similar to ours. It's about this mouth, teeth, gill rakers to prevent oil from getting into their body, esophagus, stomach, and pancreatic tissue. Not oil, sorry, food getting into their esophagus. So, so the effect of oil is quite bad. When oil floats on the surface, it affects surface fish and animals, and some digest it. Some of the harms can happen, like if the oil gets stuck in their esophagus, then they'll starve to death. If the oil gets stuck in their gills, then they won't be able to breathe and they'll suffocate. And also, since it is oil, it's very extremely toxic and can cause harm to the reproduction processes and the life cycle, and the ecosystem also gets impacted. The damage isn't only to fish, it also happens to animals and seabirds. Since fish often live below the surface, not a lot of them are affected, only surface fish are affected. But since these animals live on the surface, and when they come in contact to the water, they are on the surface of the water, they get the most affected. So otters rely on their coats to keep warm and not freeze. And when the oil soaks that, they lose that ability and they can often freeze to death. And seabirds, they rely on their wings to fly, of course. So then when the oil contaminates their wings and the oil soaks their wings, they can't fly and they'll drown. And then there's also, since it's toxic oil, many other things can occur. The esophagus can, it can cover their esophagus, and they can starve to death. They can suffocate, and it's also, since it's toxic, then there can be reproduction damage. So I contacted a professional, the Gulf study, and they just said I don't know 4 different times. So that was fun. And so since and also since there's not a lot of solutions, there are all just very expensive solutions. Then I competed in the science fair this year, and I looked into better ways of solving this and better ways of cleaning up these oil spills without harming the ecosystem that much. So I took the BP oil spill, for example, and BP oil spill occurred. There's a lot of damage that occurred, and it cost a lot of money. It cost about $61.6 billion to clean up the BP oil spill, and about 152 million gallons were spilled into the ocean, and about 8,000 fish species and animals died. So this restoration can cause harm. It can, like, chemicals and burning. It can the restoration process that they use, the way to clean up the oil, can often cause a lot of harm. So that was another reason why I wanted to look into another solution, another way of cleaning this oil up. So my solution was using cellulose to clean up oil. The benefits of cellulose is that since it's an organic compound, it won't cause any harm. It won't pollute the water. It's indigestible to fish, because when I did some tests to find out how effective cellulose was, I found that when it comes in contact with oil, it absorbs oil. But when it comes in contact with water, it actually sinks. And since it's indigestible, then if a fish does happen to swallow it when it sinks, then it won't. Then no harm. There will be no harm. And the oil that is absorbed by the cellulose can be cleaned up easily. And it's cheap. It costs about 13 to 14. It costs about $25 to for 25 grams of cellulose, which is fairly cheap. And when I calculated it out, I found that it's actually cheaper than the solution that they found, and it's also efficient. So when I did some calculations, the BP oil spill cost $61.6 billion, but counting in the wholesale price, counting in since they're producing in mass, they can produce a lot cheaper, and the effectiveness of cleaning it up, this solution costs about $8 billion compared to the $61 billion that it costs to clean up the BP oil spill. So some problems that I encountered while doing this research was that many groups did different surveys, and there were a lot of different data on this oil spills, and some groups said one thing, some groups said another. So to solve this, I just use government websites. Those are the most trustable. They might not be the most accurate, but they're most trustable. And then there's also varying information. So the importance of my presentation was to educate people about what exactly happens during an oil spill, how much it affects them, the toxicity. And actually, oil spills aren't the main cause of oil in oceans. Oil spills put about 37 million gallons in water, but people pouring oil down drains, motor oil down drains, and different types of oil down drains contributes 363 million gallons of oil into the water per year. And this causes a lot more damage, costs a lot more money to clean up. And then, so my hope was, by showing this presentation, by talking about how much it harms animals just with oil spills, just the major oil spills, and if such a large amount could cause so much more harm to animals. And also, there's also air pollution that can also come into the water, and that is 92 million gallons of water, 92 million gallons of oil that can fall into the ocean, because air pollution, carbon dioxide in the air can catch onto rain, and it can fall into the ocean. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, question. Sorry. I shall put this back on. So I'm not exactly sure about the oil spill, about where the oil spill happened. It was basically, what happened was, there's actually a movie about it, and this large tanker had an oil spill explosion because they were doing some tests on the fissure and how well the oil hole was drilled, and if it was secure enough to continue drilling oil, and to continue extracting oil. And to save money, BP decided to not do the test that year, and so the oil rig exploded and released 152 million gallons of oil into the water. Devin?
I'm just curious. Do you know if the oil has any effects on the plants and stuff underwater?
It probably does, but much of the damage that it causes is to animals and fish. Geo?
What do you mean by government websites being not the most accurate but the most trustable?
Because of course, since it's such a large amount of oil and such a large amount of water and so much a large amount of data that you have to find, of course, there will be fallacies in like the government, how government find data. But then since it's a government website, I thought it would be the most trustable and most accurate, but it might not be super accurate since it's such a large amount of oil. Cool. Oh.
Can you comment on? It looked like they were burning off the oil?
Yeah.
Was that your assessment that sometimes the
Yeah.
resolution of it by burning is worse than the actual problem itself?
Yeah, because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to look into cellulose, because many of the prevention methods, cleaning up methods can be often very harmful. Like the one method is burning, of course, that can cook the fish in the water, and there's also chemicals where they pour chemicals in the water that will break down the oil so that it won't be as harmful. And there's also skimmers that will skim the oil off the water, but that can also cause damage to fish, displace the fish.
So I understand it was cellulose.
Yeah.
But can you just paint me a picture? How would you get the cellulose into the oil? What are you thinking?
So I was thinking that I see that like in salt trucks they have that dispersion method where they have a certain amount of width that's allowed in. There's a certain amount of width between the container and the hole. And so then that would kind of control the dispersion method, and also like a sieve maybe would also help distribution. That would try to regulate that, and then also so that would be how I was thinking that you could.
There's a big pool
Yeah.
of oil.
Yeah.
You put something in the middle, and the cellulose would disperse.
No, you'd have to distribute it. You have to distribute it evenly across. And sometimes you have to do multiple layers depending on the oil. Is that it?
Hi, I'm Rod, and my 20% project is about language learning. And the reason why I choose language learning for my topic is about the question, is language learning that important? Uh, so, uh, while I'm in China, I was forced to study English by my parents. And at that time, I wasn't preparing to go to America. So I don't understand why they are forcing me to learn another language I don't know and I don't familiar with. So this question raised, is language learning that important? And to answer this question, I have to go to Oliver first. Oliver is my roommate, and he was choosing whether he should study Spanish at the start of the year. And he asked me if I can decide it for him. And he asked two questions. Is it efficient for him to learn another language? And what are the effects of learning another language? So to answer these questions, we have to know what is language learning. So language learning is about learning another language pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. So you have to understand the different shapes and different audio you hear and connect it with the meaning in your brain. And to answer the question, how efficient can it be, I have to look into how the brain cope with learning another language. So while you are learning another language, your brain establish connections between the auditory and the text you take into the meanings inside of your brain. And your brain will create another language called the inner language to help you understand these texts and the audios you hear. And while you are learning another language, your auditory and the visualized cortex will actually grow because you have to take in more knowledge and memorize them. And there's a hypothesis called the critical period hypothesis. And this hypothesis mainly suggests that the children can learn the language more effectively than the adults because they learn the language with both left and right side of their brain. And the left side of their brain usually cope with the logic and the mathematical problems, and the right side of their brain usually cope with social skills and language learning. However, for the adults, they usually only use their right side of their brain to learn another language, which slow them down. However, I've done research that suggests that sometimes the adults also can learn the language much faster than the young adults because they have more experience with different structures, and they have more understanding of grammar and vocabulary, so they will have more advanced skills of learning another language. But wait, there's more. What if you are multilingual already? So a lot of students and teachers think that if you are multilingual already, it is easier for you to learn another foreign language. But is it? I've done research that suggests that if you have learned another language before, you actually slow you down because learning a language actually takes a lot of space in your brain, and learning another language confuses you with the pronunciation of the prior language. For example, the Japanese, they usually confuses with P and the V sound, so they cannot distinguish two words properly sometimes. And after we solve the problem of the efficiency, let's talk about the effects of learning another language. So to know what's the effects of the learning another language, we have to know what is IQ. A lot of people think that IQ is a measurement of your skill of solving another problem, but it is not. It is actually a concept that created in 1990s by a psychologist in German, and IQ was created to measure the maturity of your brain and the physical age of your brain. So the function of IQ is 100 times the maturity of your mental and physical age. So what is the link between IQ and language learning? When you are learning a language, your brain structure changes because you have to take in more knowledge, and your brain have to take out more space to store them. And while you are learning another language, you will be able to solve more complex problems because while you are taking while you are learning the text and the pronunciations, you'll be able to link the sounds and visualize the images more precisely. And learning another language also improves your gray matter in the inferior cortex of your brain because you are mainly using the inferior cortex while you are learning another language. The gray matter is a matter that helps you control your muscle and control your thoughts. However, the white matter is the matter that links the cellular structure of your brain. So the more gray matter you have, the smarter you are, because you will be able to control your thoughts and your muscle more efficiently. And there's a researcher in Tibet actually done a research on the effects of learning another language. She's a teacher in a school in Tibet, and there's two classes. One class is the students in one class that only learn 3 languages, but the other class learn 4 languages. So she created an IQ quiz for both 2 classes, and the result shows that the students that are learning more languages can do the quiz faster and with more correct answers. And for myself, I also have done an IQ quiz to test if the learning another language have another effect on people's brain. So these are the results, and the multilingual students' average is about 4.6 over 10, and the monolingual students' average is about 3.5 over 10. So the result shows that the multilingual students are generally smarter than the monolingual students. So is language learning that important? It is indeed very important, because it helps you to be more social. Because while you are learning another language, you will be able to talk to more people and you will be more socialized. And learning another language can help your brain, as I said before. And so, learn more language. And for the reflection, I think I could do more research on this topic, because I was generally researching about the experiments that the scientists have done on students, and the teachers have the notes that teachers taken. And so I can do more research on how the brain works while you're learning another language. And I also could send the quiz to a wider population. So for this quiz, I only send the quiz to the biology students. So to get a more precise answer, I think I should send the quiz to the entire school, and I should send the quiz to a wider age range, so I can get a precise answer. And what I also can do is to ask the linguistics, so they can provide more detailed details to answer the questions. And that's it.
So what did you recommend to Oliver?
To take Spanish.
How long have you been learning English?
I think for 5 years.
Did you find it hard?
It is very hard at first, because I cannot understand like how to write and how to pronounce it. But now I think I'm good at it.
Is there any particular language that might have been more at a cognitive load than another one?
Most people think it's Chinese, and the researcher has like done research on the like how difficult Chinese is, and they found out like Chinese is the hardest language to write and to pronounce, because it contains more pronunciation than the other languages.
So if Chinese was your first language, then learning something else
Yes,
is
but
easier?
no, but because the pronunciation in Chinese might influence your pronunciation in other languages.
Do you have words in Chinese that you don't have here in English?
You mean meaning or pronunciation? Yeah, like
pronunciation for it. But do you use one word to do that pronunciation for it, or do you use multiple words?
we usually use multiple words.
No, I just see. Where'd the mic go?
Let's make it a little easier myself. Airplay. Here, actually, can you give me a second? Wait, can you give me a second before we do that? Or not. Let's see. Where's presentation view? Why am I forgetting how to do a presentation view? Presentation view? Help.
Right here.
Oh, yes, there we go. Ah, boy. I'm not very tech savvy, in case you can tell. Oh, come on. Why won't fit around my shirt? Ah, there we go. Okay. There we go, finally. Anyways, hello everybody, and welcome to my presentation on, if I can actually find the button, there we go. Why is this slide 3? Wait, what? Wait, how'd that get over there? Okay, sorry. Relationship in the human mind. Sorry about that, folks. I don't know what happened there. Anyways, I think that relationships are a key part of our daily lives. And I think most of you think so. Most of you think so too. Just a show of hands, how many people in this room have some sort of relationship with another human being? Sister, brother, mother, father? Hands up, people. Come on. There we go. And that's pretty much everybody, just like I thought. I think we can all agree that relationships are a very key part of our daily lives. And I really wanted to know why we feel these intense sort of emotions with the human being day after day after day, and yet most of the time we don't actually question why. Another show of hands here. How many people have actually questioned why we feel the way we do about other people? Show of hands here. Alright, not bad. And moving into it. Well, why am I doing this? Again, I wanted to know why. And there are 2 more reasons sitting right over there on the couch. Hey Mom, hey Dad, how you doing? A bit worse. Oh boy. Anyways, like I mentioned before, emotions. I think we can all agree that emotions are the keystone of any sort of human relationship. You can't form a bond without sharing some form of emotion or passion or something along those lines. And that brings me into my next topic, the limbic system. The system in your brain that controls every last one of your emotions and also affects how you bond with people, along with a whole bunch of other cool stuff that I'm currently about to dive into. But before I do that, I'd like to show you all this little graph here, just so you can get an idea of where everything is located in the brain, just for future reference. Also to kill time, but it's not the point. The only stuff that'll be important here are the hypothalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, and I'm currently realizing that I am missing a couple of things. Cingulate gyrus, there we go. Anyways, moving on. Let's start out with the hippocampus. Basically what this thing does, it starts you off with your short-term and long-term memory. Memory is definitely a key part of our daily lives, because I think it's fairly obvious. And another thing that I want to dive into is the emotional attachment part of the hippocampus. Basically, it releases some sort of substance known as dopamine. And dopamine stimulates how happy we feel and how we attach to other human beings. It affects a lot of things. And what I'm also going to dive into is how it's connected to the amygdala, which is my next thing. And right here. It's also connected to the hippocampus through the two little horns on the ends, sort of sticking up in a shape like this. And what the hippocampus does is it feeds memories through these tubes up to the amygdala, where the amygdala proceeds to sort these emotions by relevance through emotional responses. Basically, the more we react to something, the more prominent it'll be in our memory, and that will affect whether it's stored in our short or long-term memory. Say the death of a loved one, or some sort of confession. Those are things that tend to stick in our long-term memory. Or things like students' names, or this presentation, for example. It's going to leave your brain in like a week or so. And then we're on to the next thing, the cingulate gyrus. And as you can see, it takes up a significant portion of the limbic system on both sides of the brain, and it's also connected to what I talked about previously with the hippocampus and amygdala, focusing on emotionally significant events. Also focusing attention on it. This also plays a role in sorting our memories and our level of, I suppose, attachment to them. And now I'm going to get more into dopamine, which I had previously mentioned. Currently, dopamine controls a human being's pleasure and, in a way, emotional responses. Say when you're sad, your dopamine levels are going to drop. Say when you're happy, your dopamine levels are going to rise. And now on to the ventral tegmental area. This is the thing that really feeds dopamine into the rest of the brain and stimulates all these sorts of reactions. As you can see, it goes up all the way through the nucleus accumbens, all the way to the prefrontal cortex, which is right here, not right here, the substantial nigra, and the stratum. And the last thing I'm going to dive into regarding the limbic system is the hypothalamus. One of the most important things about the hypothalamus is it produces something called oxytocin, which I will dive into in a minute. And another thing that's really significant is the emotional arousal. Basically, it affects how we would react to a certain situation. Say we get into a really stressful situation, like a teacher just said, hey, your final exam is tomorrow, not next week. People are going to start freaking out. If, say, somebody was missing their hypothalamus, people would just sit there being like, okay, sure, and not worry about whatsoever. But if they have the hypothalamus, it's going to be something along the lines of, oh my god, why? Something along those lines. And now I get into the next topic, oxytocin. It's classified as a neurotransmitter for all the following reasons. Trust. Another key part of our daily lives is trust. How are we going to have a solid foundation and relationship if we cannot trust another human being? But it does have some negative side effects, believe it or not. It's supposed to be the thing. How do I put this? It's supposed to be the best part. Oh, God. No, I'm just going to stop there. Basically, in group and out group. It affects how we view people. We all know the term friend circles, I'm assuming. Anybody here not familiar with the term? Okay, real good. We all have our own friend circle, people we trust more and have a stronger bond with. But the negative part about this is while we do this, it inadvertently shuts out everybody else to the point where they're considered less important and we become less likely to actually interact with them. Another form of prejudice, basically. And moving on, I'm going to show you a little bit more about oxytocin, mainly about when, well, you produce it. So, this is a bit of a random list here, but every part of it is important. The first thing I'm going to start with is labor. Woman in the room, you know what I'm talking about. Labor is when a woman is giving birth to a child. And oxytocin stimulates this by producing contractions. And the contractions will slowly but surely help the baby get out. And this forms something called pitocin. Pitocin is used to, well, oxytocin starts the contractions and pitocin finishes it. It keeps the process going further and further and further until poof, baby's born. Another thing it's stimulated with is breastfeeding. I hope I don't need to explain that to anybody. But basically what it does is it increases the bond between mother and child. Somehow, some way. But only as long as the breastfeeding is lasting. Another funny part about oxytocin that I forgot to mention earlier. You don't constantly produce it. You only produce it when you are in contact with someone you do have a close bond with. Say, if my mom were to poke my dad, she would be producing oxytocins. If they were just sitting next to each other and not touching each other, then nothing would happen. Another time that this is greatly stimulated is during sex. I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to make anybody feel awkward. And another thing that's actually really interesting. How many people in this room are familiar with depression? Okay, that's actually kind of depressing. It's, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Scientists are currently undergoing research on the effectiveness of oxytocin when it comes to depression. They're starting to notice a bit of a pattern. People with lower oxytocin levels normally are shown to have increased levels of depression. So scientists are hoping by creating a drug that stimulates oxytocin, they will be able to one day cure depression. Which is pretty cool if you think about it. And now, that's all I got. Sorry for the mess of a presentation, folks. Thank you for listening. Any questions? Yay! Anyways, anybody else?
So I'm curious, after going through the limbic system major components, for someone who's more enthusiastic or emotional than someone else, which limbic system do you think might be enlarged or greater than others?
I would have to go with the ventral tegmental gland. I will show you briefly if I can find it. Here we go. As I mentioned earlier about dopamine, how it stimulates pleasure and happiness, I'm assuming that somebody who's basically more happy and bubbly in general will have enlarged dopamine pathways. Anybody else? Shoot. Actually, yes, there is. People with dopamine, well, too much dopamine, usually guys for some odd reason, are known to have problems down in their nether regions. And I'm not going to get into details with that. Alright, any other questions? Dr. Crothers.
So the limbic system is being called like the most reptilian type, meaning it's been there over during our evolutionary development. And you mentioned that oxytocin has an effect on that limbic system. Was that
Yep.
correct?
Yes.
What might be the advantage of then having that oxytocin affect the limbic system?
I suppose the advantage would be it acts almost like a stimulant. I don't know if people have noticed in their daily lives, but whenever we feel a little more sad, down, depressed, we tend to be less efficient, more sluggish, and overall we just feel like crap. By pumping oxytocin into the limbic system, not only are we increasing our productivity and general just happiness, well, that's actually all we're doing. I don't know where I was going with that. Any other questions?
As a follow-up, is there an evolutionary advantage?
An evolutionary advantage? I am not actually sure about that.
Because I know oxytocin has been termed the love molecule.
Love hormone.
Because of its effect in increase in trust and the bonds between, say, mother and daughter, and between relationships. Could there be some sort of evolutionary advantage?
I suppose there could be. I'm going to use a bit of an example from modern times. Since human beings are currently the most developed species on Earth, where we have our own free thought, eventually different beliefs and ideals are going to clash at some point. Take the American Revolution. Two different viewpoints clashing, where one side wants to rise up and take power over another. I'm going to make a wild assumption here and assume that the side that was being oppressed, the Americans, had lower oxytocin levels, therefore less trust and less bonding with people who were British, who were ruling over them at the time. So I would like to assume that with higher oxytocin levels and more trust between, say, a founding country and its colony, that's where everything would be less likely to happen, would be less likely to start World War III or some other random disaster that would wipe out the human race.
So I guess having that trust between individuals kind of helped form individual groups like you mentioned the colonies.
Yep. Anyone else? All right, thanks, folks. All right, who's next? Next victim. Who's that? Okay, cool.
So my name's Annalise, and my 20% project was about preventing concussions in hockey. I chose this project because I play hockey, and I've seen firsthand how devastating concussions can be to a player. Concussions affect players of all ages and levels, and you'd think that with all the technology we have today, researchers would have been able to develop a better helmet that would prevent concussions better than the ones that do today. So what is a concussion? A concussion is a brain injury caused by a blow or violent shaking of the head in which symptoms persist longer than 24 hours, and that's the scientific definition. There are many causes of a concussion, but the three main ones are severe impact, extreme shaking, and whiplash. Symptoms of a concussion vary person to person, but the most common ones are vomiting, headache, memory loss, dizziness, clumsiness, etc. One of the reasons why concussions are such a big problem is because of their long-term and lifelong effects. This includes continued abnormal brain activity, which can lead to CTE, which stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This alters the brain function and disallows the brain to make rational decisions. The problem with this, however, is it cannot be diagnosed until a person is dead, and it's very common in sports such as football and hockey because of the constant and repeated head trauma that is experienced. Other long-term effects include light sensitivity, constant headaches, never being able to play your sport again, and motor pathway issues. So what happens to the brain during a concussion? So the two most sensitive parts of the brain are the frontal lobe, which is responsible for things such as complex thinking and emotions, and the temporal lobe, which is responsible for things such as short-term memory. These are very commonly injured because they are so sensitive. Concussions occur because the brain sits in cerebral fluid inside the skull. Because of this, there's a small space in between the brain and the skull, and the brain has a consistency like jello, so when it hits the side of the skull, because of violent movement, the tissue of the brain is contorted. The side where the hit happens is called the cope side, and there's tissue damage on that side, but what many people don't realize is there's also tissue damage on the opposite side of the brain, which is called the controcope side, because when the brain hits against one side of the skull, it bounces back and hits the other side, causing tissue damage in both places. So a study was conducted in which football players were given mouth guards such as this one with sensors in it that detected the brain activity. And this was a computer-generated model from the data. And as you can see, the most tissue stretch, represented by the red, 50%, was found way deep in the center of the brain. And this was surprising because many people think that the effects of a concussion are just on the outside of the brain from the tissue hitting the skull. But actually the problems of a concussion can run much deeper. And this is because the brain, as you can see right here, this is a large fissure in the center of the brain that separates the left and right brains. And inside this fissure is a large fibrous sheet of tissue called the falx. And it's really rigid, so shock waves are able to travel through that fissure into the center of the brain, causing contorting and stretching of tissue in the center of the brain. So when you're buying a helmet, companies tell you that it needs to fit a certain way. You shouldn't be able to pull the cage down too much, up too much. There should be enough space on the sides, things like that. And you also need to replace it every 10 years. But this might not be enough. A study was conducted at VPI in which about 30 of the most popular hockey helmets were tested to see their ability to stop head acceleration. All the helmets tested were certified by HEC, which is the hockey helmet company that deems helmets safe to play in. Here are a few results from the study. The most expensive helmet on the market was the Bauer React 100, priced at $269.99, and that only received 1 out of 5 stars for protection level. Another expensive one was the CCM Resistance. This was priced at $229.99 and only received 1 star. One of the cheaper models, the Warrior Crown, priced at $79.98, was the only helmet to receive 3 stars, which was the highest point value. Other results from the study, most of the helmets fell between the 1 to 2 star range. The CCM helmet was the only one to receive 3 stars, but 9 helmets tested received 0 stars and were deemed not safe to play in at all. So one of the reasons why helmets might not protect like people think they do is because helmets are most commonly tested for skull fractures, which is really important because skull fractures can be fatal, but concussions are also a huge problem that need to be tested for. Skull fractures measure the impact that's received on the actual bone of the skull, while concussions is caused by, again, the movement of the brain, And scientists are starting to realize these are two very different injuries and should be tested for and protected against separately when designing a helmet. So is there a concussion-proof helmet? Through my research, I've found that there really isn't right now, but promising new technology could lead us to one. So first of all, the goal of a helmet. The goal of a helmet is to absorb the impact energy received during a fall. So obviously, this isn't ideal for sports such as hockey, biking, football, but the idea might be promising. The air absorbs all the impact energy, so it keeps the brain in place inside the head. This might not be practical, but a design such as this might be. This is called the Hovning. It's a Swedish design, and it's being tested in Europe right now. And what it is it looks like a neck guard, soft neck guard around the neck that you wear when it's being tested with biking now. And there's sensors in it, and when a fall is detected, the airbag inflates, similar to an airbag in a car, and covers the head, so that when if a person were to fall on their head, the impact energy would be absorbed by the air and the airbag. So the advantages to this design, people who have been using it as testing it have liked the feel of the lighter feel over the plastic classic helmet. And also, the impact was reduced by 6 times, the impact that the brain receives, 6 times than the regular plastic helmets that are most popularly used today. Obviously, since this is new technology, there's going to be risks. For example, there could be a problem with the battery, the sensors, it doesn't inflate right, and then you have no protection at all. And also, a hockey helmet's job is not only to protect you against hitting the boards or hitting your head on the ice, it's to protect against helmet-to-helmet contact, sticks, pucks, protects your eyes. And so this obviously wouldn't do that, and it wouldn't be practical for the airbag to inflate anytime something comes near you. So maybe a hybrid between the classic helmet today and the new airbag technology would be more ideal, in which the plastic casing is on the outside, but the airbag technology is on the inside. However, it wouldn't inflate every time because that just wouldn't be practical for the sport, but the technology in the air pockets could be used. So for my conclusion, concussions affect the brain because the brain sits in cerebral fluid, and the effects of a concussion go way deeper than just the outside of the brain because of that large fissure through the center. The long-term effects of a concussion are one of the reasons why concussions are such a big deal and why people are working so hard to prevent them. Helmets today obviously aren't protective enough, judging by the results of the study, and it's very misleading to people, the correlation between the price and the level of protection, because as you saw, the more protective helmet, the more expensive helmets received low scores, which is misleading people because they think if they pay more, they get a better helmet, but that obviously isn't the case. So helmets of the future, airbags, like I talked about, they're being tested for things like biking now, but as I said before, the hybrid of the classic helmet and an airbag such as this one will probably be ideal for the future. So for my reflection, what went well? This is a really relevant and talked about topic right now, and so I was able to find a lot of interesting information about it, and it was interesting to me. However, some hurdles and challenges. My original plan didn't really work out. I was originally going to find the ideal helmet, and then I realized very quickly that there wasn't one. And so I then decided to base my project more on why the helmets aren't ideal and what a concussion does and what might end up working in the future. And I chose to do this project because a lot of people, mainly because a lot of people assume that the helmets they have work because they're priced so high, but really, the helmets aren't able to protect against concussions as well as people may think. My bibliography. Any questions? Yeah.
After looking at this, are you happy with your helmet?
Not at all.
So did you happen to look at the expensive helmet versus the inexpensive helmet and notice any, is it different foam? Is it different fit? Is it a different style? Does it cover the brain differently?
Well, one of the problems with helmets today is the inside padding tends to wear it away really quickly, and the more expensive helmets are more focused on the comfort than the protection, because obviously if it's more comfortable, you're going to pick that one in the store. And so the foam is a lot softer, so it wears away easier, the foam that's used inside the helmet, and then it's not able to prevent against concussions as well as the cheaper helmet.
Which is actually interesting because you said something on the air, and you said, well, perhaps a hybrid. I thought that was a brilliant idea.
Thanks.
And what was interesting to me is that you then dismissed your own idea a little bit. You said, well, you obviously can't have the air helmet on all the time. And I'm wondering whether or not it might be useful to actually fill the inside cavity of the helmet with a material that forms to your head in an air fashion that does actually form directly to your head and keeps everything stable and can distribute the energy.
Yeah. I wasn't sure, like, just how it's so constant. Anytime a stick comes near you, it's like just kind of unrealistic for it to inflate. But definitely the technology on the inside of the airbags themselves would definitely be ideal and help protection.
How do they test the helmets?
I think I don't really remember. I think it was I'd assume they did some sort of made some sort of model of the brain and kind of like a dummy kind of, and put the helmet on it and to see how the fake brain and reacted and measure kind of how the movement was.
Just on this topic, I recently read an article on concussion, and there was a young boy in high school who actually came up with an invention which is now being sought to do. What he did is he took, I don't know if you've ever seen those, the paper that if you press on it, it makes a color.
Mm.
And what he did is he just took this paper, took his football helmet, and covered his football helmet, and depending on the impact velocity or force, it would change color. So if it was a really bad hit, it would be like red, and if it was a minor hit, it was blue. So it kind of gave people a kind of a measure of how bad something would be.
It's interesting.
So you talked about how there are measuring devices that can be in a mouth guard.
Yeah.
Would those have limitations where something like the paper might be more appropriate?
Well, they chose the mouth guard because the teeth are super hard, and it was the easiest way for this. It was the easiest way for the signals to travel from the brain and through the teeth, and yeah, that's why they chose to do it as a mouth guard.
Could you do that well, you wear a mouth guard for hockey, right?
Yeah.
You could do that for hockey, but what about soccer or wrestling?
They actually wear mouth guards as well,
In wrestling?
I think.
Really? Yep. Oh, that's something new. What's it like?
think they're going. G. Yeah, your ID. It's K18, I believe. Oh, I clicked on 16. Oh, that was fast. All right. All right, so welcome to my 20% project. For this project, I focused mainly on nicotine and its like absorption into the body. So the first topic I started, actually, before I get into smoking, I want to do like a quick survey. So can you raise your hands if you either know someone who smokes, vapes, or if you personally smoke or vape yourself? All right. Yeah. Okay, so basically, smoking is right now one of the leading causes for a lot of deaths in the United States, even though there's been a lot of awareness spread about it. So according to this diagram I have right here, I have a quick statistic of age to percentage ratios of smokers right now. And I also have some reasons why people smoke in the first place. Some reasons are because they feel down or sad, they feel anxious, so smoking makes them feel calmer because something called euphoria, which basically means when your body is in a state of a high almost, and it makes you feel just a lot better about yourself in general. So once and never out. So what is nicotine? It's a toxic, odorless, and kind of yellowish oily liquid that is used in cigarettes, vape devices, and other tobacco products. So nicotine, as we already know, as I described, is already a very addictive drug. So as people grow accustomed to it, they develop something that is kind of similar to, they adapt to it, just like an animal would adapt to a different type of environment. So after a while of adapting, people require more and more doses to get high or to feel better, and as a result, this makes people feel more and more, this can put people in danger. So people tend to overlook the fact that nicotine is very dangerous because it's sold so commonly, like you can buy cigarettes at a gas station, almost any store. So the amount of nicotine that enters a smoker's body depends primarily on the type of tobacco or that's being smoked, whether or not the smoker inhales the smoke, being that some people inhale the smoke deep into their lungs, or some people just pull it into their mouth. And also if a filter is being used. So a filter is basically something that's inside a cigarette near the mouthpiece that separates all the chemicals and toxins from the smoker's mouth, essentially. So what's inside of a cigarette? So cigarettes have around 4,000 chemicals inside them. However, I listed a couple and I put in bold 4 of them that are the most important. So, not the most important, the most dangerous. So the first one is ammonia, which is a household cleaner, as many of you may know. Also arsenic, which is used in many types of rat poisons. Cyanide, as many of you guys know, it's a really deadly poison. And lead, which is poisonous in both high and small doses. So vaping. So vaping's been a fairly new topic. It's been around for a while, but it started gaining popularity over the past around 2 years. And so it's another form of tobacco inhalation, and it's basically a liquid it's most commonly a liquid that is put into a device, and there's many names for it: e-juice, vape juice. I'm going to use vape juice for this presentation because that's more commonly used. And basically, it's heated up into a vapor that can be technically smoked. And so people say that, it's healthier because it's just water vapor, doesn't have as much chemicals. But the problem is a lot of these companies refuse to offer much information about what actually is inside of it, except for these base ingredients that I'll show in the next slide. So what's inside vape juice? So vape juice has water, vegetable glycerin, propane glycol, flavors which are natural and artificial, as well as nicotine. So there's a lot of companies, as I was saying earlier, that won't release the 100% of the amount of information that they're putting into their products because they don't want what they call, what makes their product unique, they don't want it to be stolen. So they do something, as I have some pictures up here. they cater a lot to children because that's how they're going to make more business. But I'll explain that in the next slide. So, smoking and advertisements. So, there's vaping and smoking. Smoking, as we all know, it's very bad for your health, and there's been a lot of awareness spread about it. But, so I was trying to find some advertisements that glorified both smoking and vaping. However, for smoking, I wasn't able to find any, so I kind of went back in time a bit, and I found some older advertisements. So one of these on the left here talks about how it's helpful and it gives immediate relief for asthma, bronchitis, coughs, hay fever, influenza, shortness of breath, even though cigarettes are actually responsible for most of these symptoms. And on the right, there's another picture which portrays a happy family watching their child smoke, and they're saying that every little cigarette helps, and it's just portraying things falsely when these companies knew already that it was bad for you. So, vaping and advertisements. So, companies are advertising to kids because if these kids get hooked when they're young, when they get older, they're going to be customers until they die. Well, until they quit, hopefully. Since there are tight regulations by the government in terms of these video advertisements, most companies aren't really able to put them on television or news networks. However, they're uploaded to YouTube, and also these companies use very appealing names as well as very appealing flavors for kids. I have a quick advertisement here that talks about how vaping is glorified, and there's a little thing hidden somewhere in here that I'll point out later if nobody saw it, but it's pretty bad. I'm sorry, my full screen isn't working, if you don't mind. But essentially, it talks about the different flavors, and then at the end, I'll pause it right here. If you can see it, pardon me, I'm going to do that. Right here, it says, relax is just vapor, which is a huge lie, and I wanted to point that out. So, what can you do to stop the spread of vaping in this epidemic? So, if you're wondering how best to stop or to tell someone who does vape to stop, tell them that using these products is, even though it may seem harmless because it doesn't have as many chemicals, that it's actually really dangerous. And since most companies don't release what's actually inside them, it's impossible to determine the true dangers that they possess. And as I said earlier, they're targeting children through these products. And so I have an advertisement here. Yeah, I'll play it. I don't think the audio is working. Sorry. So that was an ad by a company called The Real Cost, which is a government association that's trying to put an end to both smoking as well as vaping. So in terms of people who smoke, or people that you know that smoke, similar to vaping, let them know the true dangers of these products. Also, smoking is a cause of 480,000 deaths in just 1 year, and that's only in the United States. That's not including other countries around the world. So I also have a video from the Real Cost also, and it's about a man that was victim of smoking. What? Oh, I'm so sorry, G. Thanks for pointing it out. So that was a video. That was a video about the dangers of smoking, and that could be pretty convincing also for people who do smoke, to warn them of the dangers. So withdrawal and why it's so hard. So Withdrawal is essentially when you're trying to get off a drug, but you go through these symptoms that include like weakness, vomiting, excessive sweating, fatigue, not remembering things, and other things that make you feel pretty bad. So, according to silencedaily.org, people who try to quit smoking often say that while they're trying to kick their habit, their voice and like their brain keeps telling them to light up instead. And basically, lighting up is slang for just lighting another cigarette. So the brain has nicotine receptors in it, and after they're exposed, they begin to crave it because they become dependent upon this because it makes them feel better. So once someone stops smoking, the brain, which is now dependent on nicotine, causes the individual to feel very weak, grumpy, and kind of empty. So it makes them crave to smoke again. And basically, after people start smoking, they realize that after a while, after they smoke, that they start feeling worse. And then after a while, their brain picks up the hint that I just need to smoke again to feel better. So then the brain isn't a constant schedule, and when you try to break that, it's really hard, especially if you're not getting professional help, because if you're trying to do it by yourself, it's going to be really difficult because you're probably going to go back to it. So some challenges I had in my project. Well, so making sure that my project met school policy. So originally I was going to do my project on vaping mostly and like more of the mechanical aspects of vaping. So I was going to take apart a vape mod, like show how it worked essentially. But I decided to do a topic switch since there's barely any research out about vaping since it's still pretty new. So as I wrote below, I had trouble finding substantial research, and I also had a lot of computer issues, including my computer didn't work for a couple of weeks, my websites wouldn't load, things of that sort. And also, understanding why teenagers these days sometimes choose to vape or smoke was a bit difficult for me to understand. And that's my works cited. And that's all. Any questions? Yeah. Did you? That was just smoking. I couldn't find anything on vaping that was really reliable, like any good site. That was, yeah. Sorry.
What are the name of the companies that make these vapes?
There's many, like, I know there's 51.
You know what the first company was that made it?
That made a vape device? I'm not sure, actually. I'm sorry. The first vape device, I think it was an e-cig, which is blue, because it was like, yeah, I believe it was blue, because it was a company that was simulating what a cigarette was, but it was like an e-cigarette, and they looked the same, so that was the first e-cig, but then people came up with different ideas and modifications for it to make it look different. Well, they're kind of odorless, pretty much. Like, the vapor doesn't linger too long, and it's pretty easy for people to get their hands on those devices. Yeah. Not so much because vape devices don't have too much nicotine in them, but they do. I've interviewed and talked to some people. They say it kind of keeps like the anger away, so like you feel you're not like feeling very happy, but you're not angry. Like it just keeps you at a neutral level, kind of. Yeah. Geo, Jack, either one. Honestly, not really. I know that there's an age limit of age 18 on them. Do you?
I know from personal experience that there's a bunch of different flavors for vaping, and you also mentioned that earlier. So it's a little hard for people to detect suddenly behind a lingering odor like smoking does. But is there any reliable way to detect people have been vaping or any telltale signs?
Yes and no. Like someone can smell it. Like you can smell like fruit, I guess, but it could either be perfume because like you don't know which one it is. Like vapor, they have different flavors. Like they have like mango, mint, things of that sort. So pretty much, you really can't distinguish. I know that I don't think vaping even shows up in drug tests really, because the amount of nicotine is so subtle because it's mixed in with all these other like water and stuff.
So basically, if you smell something unusual in an area, it shouldn't be like if you smell strawberry banana tobacco, for example.
Yeah, that's probably vape. Yeah, unless there's aerosol spray, but yeah.
Are kids putting other things in the vape?
Yeah, recently there's been kids putting alcohol, but the problem with that is, yeah, in vape devices, but it goes right into your bloodstream, so like it gets you really drunk and it can almost kill you because like if you drink too much, like they can pump your stomach, but if you vape alcohol, it's right into your bloodstream, it can kill you almost instantly. Well, not instantly, but within like an hour.
It's not true that if somebody vapes alcohol, it's the equivalent to 10 times that of a shot.
Yeah, 10 shots. Yeah, 10 to 12 shots. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of anything called wet lung?
No, I've heard of vapor's lung though, which is similar. Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So what's that?
I think it's just like when the lungs are just extremely weakened. It's just a lot of dryish coughing. That's pretty much all. Yeah. And also a lot of mucus can develop and stuff in the throat passageways. Yeah.
You say they're targeting kids, like how young?
As far as I know like 12 and up. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like there's certain stores that kids can walk in, and as long as the kid has the money, that they'll give it to them. It's all industry about money. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Mine goes up to my. I have a turtleneck. It'll go right into my neck. Here.
Hey everyone, I'm Stella.
I'm Caroline.
And for our 20% project, we decided to research and focus on the mental illness, schizophrenia. I chose this topic because I remember reading an article a while back about the Virginia Tech shooting and how the shooter was schizophrenic. I wanted to learn more about this disease, its causes, and what it's like to live with this disease on a daily basis.
I chose this topic because I watched a movie called A Beautiful Mind about a mathematician who had schizophrenia and overcame the disorder to win a Nobel Prize. This piqued my interest and I want to learn more about the symptoms and causes. We went around campus asking our peers a few questions about schizophrenia. We wanted to know if it was a commonly known disease. Here's a quick video showing you what we found.
The audio. So basically what we found in that video is a lot of people didn't know
what exactly that disease was, and they also confused it commonly with split personality disorder, and they thought it was just focused on hearing voices and it doesn't affect the other 5 senses. So starting off, what is schizophrenia? So schizophrenia is a severe mental illness that inhibits a person's ability to think clearly, make decisions, control emotions, socialize, and relate with others. Anyone can be diagnosed with this disease. Although there is no full treatment for this disease, it is still possible to live a good life. So there are 4 main symptoms of schizophrenia. The first one is hallucinations. This is the most common symptom of schizophrenia. It affects one of the 5 senses, one or more of them. So usually people experiencing hallucinations will usually hear, see, smell, taste, or feel things that others don't. It can usually involve seeing or hearing characters that they know in real life or imaginary and false characters. The second main symptom of schizophrenia is delusions. Delusions usually include when a person has confused thinking, trouble concentrating, and they kind of feel like their thoughts are blocked in a way. A person may also have false beliefs that don't change when presented with new information. The third main symptom is negative symptoms. Negative symptoms include when a person is emotionally dull, they start withdrawing from social activities, and they sometimes start isolating themselves from others. These symptoms can commonly be confused with clinical depression, so it's important to distinguish the two. The last main symptom of schizophrenia is cognitive issues and disorganized thinking. Again, this is really similar to delusions when a person has trouble concentrating and their thoughts are kind of confused and mixed. This is also when anosmia comes in play, which is when a person is unaware that they are ill. So a schizophrenic person may not be fully aware that he or she has the disease, and this makes it harder and harder for them to treat them. So these are some pictures. These were taken from a person who was actually schizophrenic, and she wrote an article and drew pictures about what she saw during her hallucinations. So as you can see, it involves different characters and just imaginary things. Here are a few more examples simulating a hallucination.
Causes. The first cause of schizophrenia is genetics. Schizophrenia tends to run in families, although it isn't dependent on one gene. It is more likely that it is a combination of genes that makes people more vulnerable to inherit it. However, just because the gene runs in the family doesn't mean one will develop schizophrenia and have the symptoms. The second cause of schizophrenia is brain development. There have been studies showing that the brains of people with schizophrenia and those without it are slightly different. Brain development issues can implicate the prefrontal cortex, which is the area just behind the forehead, which is used for high-order capabilities such as strategizing, categorizing, and prioritizing. Damage to the prefrontal cortex can cause disordered thinking and psychosis. And psychosis is when thoughts and emotions are so impaired that there's a loss of reality. Psychosis and disordered thinking are highly associated with the symptoms of schizophrenia. And the third cause of schizophrenia is pregnancy and birth complications. And people who can develop schizophrenia could have experienced complications during or before birth. And some of these complications can be a low birth weight, a lack of oxygen during birth, or premature labor. These complications can impact the brain development and lead to schizophrenia. And this connects back to psychosis and disordered thinking. The fourth cause of schizophrenia is triggers. Triggers are things that can cause schizophrenia to develop in people who are already at risk for it. And an example of a trigger is stress. Stress can be a big trigger if there are stressful events occurring in one's life. And some of these stressful events can be a loss of a job or home, divorce, the end of a relationship, or sexual, emotional, or physical abuse. And although these events are very stressful, they aren't the cause of schizophrenia, but can trigger development in someone who is already at risk for it. The final cause is drug abuse. Although drugs don't directly cause schizophrenia, there have been many studies showing that the misuse of drugs can increase the risk of developing schizophrenia. Some drugs that can cause schizophrenia, that can cause the development of schizophrenia, is cannabis, LSD, cocaine, and amphetamines. And these can trigger symptoms of schizophrenia in people who are susceptible to the condition. Many cocaine and amphetamines, which are very dangerous drugs, can cause relapse and psychosis and can cause psychosis. And there have also been 3 main studies showing that people at age 15 years or younger who use cannabis or other more dangerous forms of drugs are up to 4 times more likely to develop schizophrenia by age 26. This is a huge problem in today's community because many teens don't understand the risk of experimenting with drugs. And here are the genetic statistics of inheriting schizophrenia. If both parents have schizophrenia, there is a 45% chance that their offspring will inherit the mental disorder. And if one parent has schizophrenia, there's a 13% chance that their offspring will inherit it. If an identical twin has schizophrenia, there's a 40 to 50% chance the other identical twin will have it. And lastly, if a sibling has schizophrenia, there's a 9% chance that another sibling will have it.
So a schizophrenic episode is split into 4 phases. The first phase is the prodromal phase. This is really difficult to diagnose in teens. It usually includes when a person has a change of friends, grade droppings, irritability, and isolation from others. This is also the phase where odd thoughts and suspicions start to occur in a person. The importance of this stage is if the prodromal symptoms are detected and treated, it can prevent the development of a full case of schizophrenia. The second phase is the active phase. This is when the actual psychotic behaviors happen. So the 4 main symptoms we talked about before, hallucinations, delusions, negative symptoms, cognitive issues, and disorganized thinking, will usually all happen in this phase. The third phase is the residual phase. This is really similar to the prodromal phase. A person may still have some negative symptoms left over from the active phase, but all the psychotic behaviors are gone. The patient also may carry on strange beliefs that they developed during their hallucinations in the active phase. The fourth phase is the recovery phase. The recovery phase is different for each person. Some people may be able to completely recover from the disease and won't have any problems later on in their life. Most people, which is the most common, will have 1 full case of schizophrenia, but will have small ongoing episodes for the rest of their life. Some people may need medications and support for the rest of their life in order to prevent relapses in the future. So we're going to play a quick video of a hallucination simulation. So basically the person is hearing voices and the voices are telling them to do certain things. Can I play the audio off my computer? I have it.
Just show the video with the subtitles.
The video is...
You can hear us. You can see us. Stupid. You're so stupid.
I'm so stupid.
You are wasting time.
I just want to wake up.
We're your only friends.
Your hair is uneven. Fix it. Fix it. She's getting mad.
You are nothing but a bother to your friends. Your friends don't
As you can see from the video, the voices seem very real to a person experiencing it, and it can cause them to have weird beliefs and make not fully informed decisions during their lifetime.
Diagnosis. The diagnosis of schizophrenia typically involves ruling out other conditions with similar symptoms. The first step of diagnosing a patient with schizophrenia is a physical exam. And a physical exam may be done to help rule out other problems that could be causing the symptoms and to check for any related complications. The second step is test and screening. These tests will help rule out other conditions with similar symptoms and screenings for alcohol and drugs. The doctor may also request imaging studies such as an MRI or CT scan of the brain. The third step is a psychiatric evaluation. A doctor or mental health professional will check the patient's mental status by observing the appearance or demeanor. They will also ask questions about moods, thoughts, delusions, hallucinations, and possible violence or suicide. It will also include a family and personal history check. The last step of diagnosing a patient is the diagnostic criteria. A mental health professional will use the criteria in Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders to diagnose the patient with schizophrenia.
So although currently there is no full form of treatment for treating a schizophrenic case, there are medications and antipsychotics that can help relieve symptoms such as delusions and hallucinations. But each of these medications have some severe risks involved. Also, because of the lack of awareness and serious side effects of these medications, the patients are usually uncertain about taking them. This can relate to ethical issues, which we will discuss later on. So the first type of medication available is first-generation typical antipsychotics. These are again used to relieve symptoms of schizophrenia, but they can cause serious movement problems short-term and long-term and also cause muscle stiffness. The second type is second-generation atypical antipsychotics. These can also trigger weight gain increase and diabetes, but a proper diet and daily exercise can help reduce these risks.
The second half of the treatments include psychosocial treatments, and these treatments typically are used for patients with not severe symptoms. And although these patients are relatively free of psychotic symptoms, they still might have problems with communication, motivation, self-care, and maintaining relationships with others. The first form of psychosocial treatment is rehabilitation. Rehabilitation programs emphasize social and vocational training to help patients and former patients overcome difficulties in these areas. Some of these programs may include vocational training, job training, money management skills, and the use of public transportation. This will help a patient with schizophrenia reach a productive lifestyle. The second form of treatment is family psychoeducation. This is a very important treatment that implicates the positive effect on family participation that helps the family and patient support one another. This will lead to a lot of distress in one another's life. The third treatment is cognitive therapy. Cognitive therapy helps patients learn coping strategies for controlling remaining symptoms, and these are the symptoms that their medications can't help with. The last form of treatment is psychotherapy, and psychotherapy treatments are directly involved with therapists. And in these therapy sessions, there will be structured counseling, relapse prevention, and care coordination. And these are used to help patients who need help dealing with other issues and symptoms that their medication can't fix.
So how to react and help if your friend or family member is diagnosed with schizophrenia. The first step is to be calm and understand the disease and what it is like to live with it. The next step is to look at triggers. For example, if they lost their job and driving past or near where their job took place triggers them to have a psychotic episode, try to remove that from their life. Also, stuff like bright lights can also be a trigger for a certain person, so try to pay attention to what triggers them and try to help them. The third is to ensure they're taking their proper medications because it will help relieve their symptoms. The fourth step is to understand that they might have anosmia, which is lack of awareness. So your friend or family member may not even be aware that he is ill, so you shouldn't try to convince him of that. The fifth step is if your friend or family member has had a substance abuse problem in the past, make sure they seek help immediately because these can increase the symptoms of schizophrenia or make it worse for a person who already has it.
Ethical issues. As Stella and I were researching schizophrenia, we found that there are many ethical issues. The first is informing patients. Many physicians struggle with telling all the information about medication and their disorder to the patients because of the risk that patients might be scared off and won't return. This is a huge problem with patients that are paranoid because they will have hallucinations telling them to not take their medication. And as Stella mentioned earlier, it is not a good idea to confront the patient that they have a mental disorder, or else that they will get angry and refuse their medication. This is a huge ethical issue because it is unethical for doctors to withhold information about the medication that they are treating their patients with, but it is hard for them to give the medication without their patient being scared off. The second ethical issue is ambitious patients. Many schizophrenic patients are ambitious with their ideas and don't want to receive the medication if it interferes with their career goal or idea. This puts the doctor in a hard spot by telling them what will help them without the patient being opposed to the idea. Many doctors feel the need to leave out the medication that will include this so that the patients can get the best medical care possible.
The third ethical issue we found was related to the patient's decision making. Because of the psychotic symptoms and lack of insight and awareness in schizophrenic patients, it affects the patient's ability to make fully informed decisions about their own care. For example, as you saw in the hallucination video we played, the voices that the person was hearing in their head was specifically telling them not to take the medications. So this can affect the patient's ability to make the right and informed decision because the hallucinations of schizophrenia are influencing that. And that can make sure that they won't receive the proper care if they're refusing to take or receive medications from their doctor.
Reflection. What worked for Stella and I was time management. Early into getting the 20% project assigned, we did most of our research so we could prepare for our presentation and putting in our presentation. We also could find a lot of relevant information about the symptoms, causes, ethical issues, and more. This helped us get a fully understanding of what schizophrenia was so we could share it to everyone else.
So one thing that didn't work through our project was that it was hard to find information on ethical solutions. We found a lot of ethical issues related to schizophrenia, but there are no solutions that have been thought of today. These are the sources we use for our research.
Does anyone have any questions?
If the patient wants to get better, why do you think they hear voices in their head that says don't take the medicine?
I think they can't fully control what the voices in their head are telling them to. So if they're telling them not to take their medication, they'll be overcome by all these voices telling them not to, that they'll finally start to believing them and they won't want to receive the best medical care.
So you talked about the ethical issues for a patient with schizophrenia versus a doctor trying to respect their autonomy. How does a physician or doctor, or even a loved one, walk that fine balance between respecting a patient's autonomy, but then also trying to do their most good?
I think that's like why the ethical issue is so hard. Also because your friend or family member and doctor wants to respect what your decision is, but they have to also understand that that may not be your fully informed decision and it's influenced by the voices. So they have to kind of, is that their right decision or is it being influenced by what they're hearing? So.
think it's hard to tell what the patient is hearing versus what they believe, but I think in many cases, patients want the best for themselves and they want to get better. So I think physicians can mostly identify if them not wanting to receive medication is their decision or their voice telling them to.
In your research, did you find patients who are on medication go, in fact, off of medication and do okay, or was that never the case?
Like,
Or is it like once you're on medication and you have schizophrenia, that's like a lifelong situation?
so like the medications and antipsychotics around today, they're only able to relieve the symptoms for like a short period of time, so it can't fully treat the case of schizophrenia. So patients with a really severe case will have to have medications and support for the rest of their life.
One last question. You talked about the 4 stages of someone who has schizophrenia. I think the first one was prodromal, active,
I can go back.
residual, and then recovery. How does one go through what pushes an individual, say, into an active phase, or what allows someone to come from the residual phase? Can someone relapse back? What might trigger that or push an individual to the next phase?
I think probably like from our research, what pushes them to the next phase is their triggers. So the prodromal phase, they haven't schizophrenia, like the hallucinations haven't really kicked in yet. But if something really triggers it, like drug or substance abuse, that can it can push it, and it will get like more severe. And then going from residual to recovery, I think that all depends on the person. I mean, the medications and antipsychotics can help that. So if a person's symptoms are relieved for a period of time, the patient may get better. But as like some people with severe cases, they're going to need it. They're never going to fully make it to the recovery phase. Yeah, like I think like people with the most severe cases, they're gonna lots of triggers will trigger them to have relapses, more psychotic episodes. So they'll kind of be stuck in those 2 stages.
So what are the medications? Are like lithium, or what are the other things? Do you know the drugs they give them?
I don't know the specific
Is
names.
it all like like oral medication that they have to swallow, and the patient can either take it or not take it?
We didn't go into depth on that, but I would assume yes, it is.
I'm just wondering if there's like from a delivery standpoint, like with birth control, where you can have something implanted and it gives you a dose sort of involuntarily over time. Is there anything like that over there for schizophrenia?
We don't know exactly.
But that would also bring up another ethical issue. Would it be involuntary or involuntary? To have something implanted